Okay, in this video we're going to do some more math functions just for practice defining these functions where they take in values and return values. Right, return values, parameters and arguments to take values in. Let's start off with, you know what, I've got a little app template here. Let's copy and paste that. And then I will name this math functions. Okay, and in the video description I'll share this template with you so that you can use it as well. Okay, when I do the math functions and open that up, should just be a basic, change the title, math functions, although I'm not really going to use the HTML at all here. I'm just going to use the JavaScript, so I don't know why I'm wasting my time with the title, but it's important, especially when I mistype it. Okay, anyway, main.js. I just want to practice defining some math functions here, and I'm going to start with, actually I still have my sandbox open, so I'm going to take this function, because I think that'll come in handy as well. Right, that random desc function, low, high, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we've tested this one, we know it works already. Now what I'd like to do, let's shut this one down actually, is in my math functions, I'd like to define a function called random int. That works essentially the same, return a random integer between low, inclusive, and high, exclusive. So if you remember, we can do the same stuff here, math.random times high minus low, that'll be the decimal. All we need to add to this is a math.floor, and I'm going to floor the result of this. Right? So instead of a decimal, the floor will round it down, and I can return that result. Now, something interesting here, I copied and pasted this. So technically what I could have done actually is to simplify this maybe is just gone random decimal low and high. Right? So now I'm actually going to call inside of the random int function that takes in a low and a high, I'm going to pass the low and the high parameters that I got here as arguments into the random decimal function, which will store those values in here. It'll do the calculation to get a random decimal and return it. Once this returns with a random decimal, I floor it, so it's now a random integer, which returns from this function. Wow, that's awesome. Okay, actually this would be fun to see on the JavaScript tutor. I might do that. Let's just test this out, console.log, random int between 1 and 10. And let's see if this should be 1 up to 10, right? So anything from 1 to 9. Let's go live on this one. And let's see if this works. Okay, there's a 5. Refresh, 6, 2, 9. Looks good. I'd like to get a 1. I'd feel more confident if I got a 1 to know that that 1, yay, there it is. The 1 is inclusive. Okay, let's do that. I'm going to copy and paste this into my visualize JavaScript. I don't need this anymore because I think it'll be interesting to see. Okay, so look, there's two functions, random desc and random int. This line of code here we'll call random int. And oh, yeah, okay, this is good. And then the low and high are 1 and 10. And now it should call random desc. So there's random decimal, and the low and high values here got passed into here. This will now do its work and get a random decimal, which it'll return. So it returns, this is where it called random decimal, so it returns here. And then I'm going to floor that random decimal to get a return value of 3, which is then going to return back to here and print out the 3. Cool. So that just kind of shows you how, yeah, this function passes the arguments into this function, and it returns and returns, etc. Okay, that's kind of neat. All right, so these are just, I wanted to do these functions because I found that that's lacking in just plain old JavaScript, is that we have the math.random, but it's nice to be able to get decimals or integers between certain values. So these functions will hopefully prove very useful to you. Another function that I find interesting is math dot, let's open this up, that's big, math dot round. So 2 point whatever rounds to 2. But I wish I could do something like 2.343 this comma 2 and say I want to round it off to 2 decimal places. It doesn't. Math, you can put whatever you want here, it doesn't matter. Math.round always rounds to the nearest integer. I'd like to be able to round off to something else. So what I'm going to suggest is we do a function called round2, and it'll take in a number and num places. Right? So this will be the number, and the number of decimal places basically to round it off to. Set a comment, round num off to the nearest num places, essentially, right? So this was 2, nearest 2 decimal places, nearest hundredths, etc. Okay, now, cool little trick to do this is, hold on, let me open this up for a second. My little sketch pad here, let's remove it. Cool little way to think of this is if we've got like 2.357, I hate writing with a mouse. If all I can do is round to the nearest integer, let's say I wanted to round it off to the nearest tenth. A little trick we could do is we could take this number and we could times it by 10. If you times it by 10, you'd get 23.57. You could then do the math.round. Oh wow, that's really annoying. Math.round and round this off to 24. Right? It rounds it off to the nearest integer. And then you could simply divide by 10 to get it back to 2.4. Right? So by multiplying, you move it over the decimal over, then round to the nearest 1, nearest integer, and then divide back. Okay, so that's kind of the main strategy we're going to do. Sorry for the awful mouse writing. Okay, so let's, first of all, if I wanted to 2 decimal places, I'd like to times it by 100. So that'd be 10 to the power of 2. 1 decimal place would be 10 to the power of 1. 3 decimal places would be 10 to the power of 3, etc. So let temp num be assigned. Actually, I guess it doesn't matter temp num. I can just go num is assigned num times 10 to the power of num places. Right? So I'm going to change num by multiplying it by 10 to the power of num places. So 2 decimal places times it by 100. Okay? Then I'm going to say num is assigned math.round num. Right? So I've multiplied it by 10, or 10 to the power of whatever. I round it off to this integer, and then I need to divide 10 to the power of num places. And in fact, I don't need this variable anymore. This is actually what I wish to return. Right? After I've divided, I've rounded it off and divided to bring it back to where it should have been, and that should give me the right number rounded off. Let's test it. Console.log, round to 2 decimal places. Let's copy and paste that and round it to 1 decimal place. Round it to 3 decimal places. Why don't I do it in order? 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's see if that works. This page. There we go. 1 decimal place, 2 decimal places, 3 decimal places. Cool. And that makes sense. Rounds to 3, rounds to 3, 5, and 3, 4, 5. Yep. Awesome. Okay. So again, this is just simply defining functions that take in values and return values. Again, you can do stuff before the return, right? But as soon as you say return, it returns from this function. I could go console.log hello here, and it'll actually warn me, right? What did it say? It should have given us remove unreachable code, right? It says this code is unreachable because it's after a return statement. It'll never have a chance to run that code. That's cool. Anyway, I think that's it. I'll stop there. Like I said, for you guys, I'll get you to define a couple of functions yourself for practice, and these functions should prove useful that you can use in other programs and stuff too. It's one of the beauties of functions, right? The idea of this reusability. You can reuse these functions, right? I can totally see, using random decimal and random int and round2 in other programs. Okay, they'll come in handy. All right, hope that made sense. Take care and see you in the next video.